Hello, I'm Dana Sparks, broker with Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors. And today's contract tip has to do with the changes coming into effect tomorrow, October 3rd. I know no one's closing tomorrow, but they go into effect October 3rd. And those changes, you will hear lots of terms. You'll hear CFPB, you'll hear TRID, you'll hear RESPA changes, you'll hear all types of changes. CFPB stands for Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and TRID is an acronym that is now being used for a combination of the disclosures between RESPA and the Truth in Lending Act. So those disclosures have now been combined, and your closings are now governed through the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau rather than through HUD. So a couple of things as a broker to you as an agent that you need to be aware of, starting with any closings that begin next week. A couple of things. One is, in many situations, the lender is actually preparing the closing statement. Actually, let me back up. The closing statement is no longer called the HUD-1 settlement statement because HUD now has nothing to do with the closing statement. It is called a closing disclosure, or CD. So you will start to hear that term being used in our industry. And now to point number two, in many situations, the lender is actually preparing the closing disclosure, no longer the closing attorney, but the lender. So what happens is the closing attorney may receive information from you as the agent, and they have to send it to the lender to prepare this closing disclosure. The closing attorney must get all of the information to the lender approximately 10 to 14 days prior to the closing date for the completion of the closing disclosure to meet the delivery requirement. So you as an agent, you will have to communicate with the closing attorney all the buyer paid charges at least 10 to 14 days prior to closing, and your commission charges prior to that, and any HOA information, so that the closing attorney can then get this information to the lender. So I'll get into that in a second. Additionally, the closing attorney will need, they're asking for the state license number of your brokerage. That's just the GREC firm number. If you're using a GAR form or the RE form and you're going through FMLS Forms Pro or Georgia MLS, that number should be auto-populated on your contract. If not, it's just the GREC firm number. For Maximum One Realty Greater Atlanta, it is 56897. For Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, it's 62825. Again, it is just the GREC firm number that is auto-populated on your contract. On the closing disclosure, additionally, you will also need your actual real estate license number. Additionally, what has to happen is the lender has to get out this CD at least 3 business days prior to closing with no changes. So at least no changes that are going to affect the APR or the buyer side funds. And proof of receipt is required. So the closing disclosure that the lender sends the buyer is only going to have the buyer side information. It is not going to have the seller side information. Additionally, neither the closing attorney nor the lender is allowed to send you, the agent, a copy of this preliminary closing statement like you're used to getting. If you want to see it to go over it with your buyer, you are going to have to get it directly from the buyer. Again, the attorney and the lender are not allowed any longer to send that directly to you. Any changes, any financial changes that happen on the settlement statement are that after the lender has sent it to the buyer, the 3 days prior to closing, anything that comes up that's going to change that may trigger a new 3-day waiting period, especially anything that is going to change the APR or the loan product, or anything that will add, for example, a prepayment penalty. That will cause a new 3-day disclosure time period. You cannot close within that. That 3 business day disclosure time frame has got to be in effect. So as an agent, knowing that these disclosures may have to be, this settlement statement or closing disclosure may have to be re-disclosed, anything that could potentially change that, for example, if you're doing a walkthrough and the seller has not necessarily done the agreed upon repairs and the buyer and the seller agree to handle it financially, and that's going to go on this closing disclosure that may change the APR and so forth, that is going to have to get to the lender. The lender will have to prepare a new closing disclosure, and then that will have to be re-disclosed. You cannot close within those 3 days. So, couple things. Do not do any final walkthroughs day of closing, especially if repairs aren't done and the parties are going to have to handle it financially. I suggest you do a couple of final walkthroughs, a preliminary walkthrough at least 2 weeks, if not more, prior to closing, so that if the seller has not taken care of any of those issues, you can, and you're going to handle it financially, you can do it then, send the information, and you will still fall within the same time frame of your closing date. Additionally, we are being told that it's going to take longer to prepare all of this information. So we suggest you schedule your closings for at least 45 days out, not 30 days out, but at least 45 days out. The other thing to be aware of is if you are binding on a GAR contract and you have a unilateral right to extend the closing, be aware that you're going to have to look at your time frame, and when a closing attorney can maybe fit you in their schedule, so that might come into effect. Make sure you take a look at your contract and the dates and a calendar. Be aware, if you're binding on the RE forms contract, you do not have the right to unilaterally extend the contract. You will have to extend it by a bilateral amendment. So what if the seller has a backup offer waiting? They don't have to agree to an extension. So please be aware of that. Additionally, the line numbers on the closing disclosure have been removed. So those line numbers on the HUD-1 settlement statement we're used to looking at, those have been removed. And the fee areas, there are now 7 fee areas on the disclosure. Origination charges, services borrower did not shop for, services borrower did shop for, taxes and other government fees, prepaids, initial escrow payment at closing, and other. So if you are getting a DA or pay at close from us, there are only a certain number of lines in which these fees can be itemized. So if there are other fees that go on there, such as, for example, a home warranty, so forth and so on, if there is not enough room to put on a DA, because on a DA, it has to be itemized how much money you as the agent are getting, how much the check is for that, as well as how much Maximum One is getting, and as well as how much the FMLS fee is. So if there's not enough room on the closing disclosure, depending upon what else is being itemized, you may not be able to get a DA simply because there is not room on this statement and they cannot add any additional lines. Also, if both agents are getting a pay at close, that may run out of room as well. Speaking of DAs, again, since all of this information must get to the lender who was preparing this at least 10 to 14 days prior to closing, your DA, your contract is going to have to be completely complete, and your DA information without any changes is going to have to get to the proper person filling out this or creating this closing disclosure within that time frame. So if you are going to contribute a, let's say a home warranty, or if something happens through the negotiations, through the amendments, through the repair process, anything along those lines, and it is going to change how much you are going to get, how much your check is going to be with the DA, just keep that in mind. Again, all of this has to be done. We now have a longer time frame, and do not do your walkthroughs day before closing, or you may not close. Additionally, All emails from closing attorneys and lenders are going to be encrypted. So if you or your clients are a bit email challenged, that could be an issue that needs to be addressed and discussed up front. Attorneys cannot email the agent's wiring instructions for the for the buyer's down payment. Those have to go directly from the closing attorney to the buyer, him or herself. Closings are going to take longer, is what we are being told. And because closings are going to be taking longer, we are hearing that many closing attorneys, if the parties are not on time to the closing, they are going to have to reschedule that closing. So please make sure you as an agent are on time. You have got to stress the importance to your buyer and your seller that they have got to be on time for their closings, or they may have to close on another day, which could cause all sorts of issues. Hazard insurance must be paid prior to the lender sending out the closing statement for approval. So again, you cannot get an estimate and just shop for hazard insurance. A buyer must actually secure hazard insurance. 3 days is the drop dead deadline, but if you're sending that information to the closing attorney who is then sending it to the lender, again, closing attorney has to have information to the lender 10 to 14 days prior to closing. The HOA letters will be an issue. I am telling y'all right now, the issue that we're having now is many of the HOAs they're dating their letters, they're only good for 14 days. So if the closing attorney has to get the letter from the HOA, they order the HOA letter, and then a couple days occurs, and then they send it to the closing attorney, and I'm getting confused. The lender, and then the lender needs that information 14 days prior to closing. Chances are there is a high likelihood that you are going to have to get 2 HOA letters in order to close. Determine up front who is going to pay for those HOA letters, so that is not an issue at closing. What else? There are, again, just lots of issues, especially for the first 90 days as these changes go into effect. Couple of really, really strong recommendations. Number 1, take a class. You will see many classes. Maximum One's class that we offer on this is called Show Me the Money and Get Me to Closing. We are offering it at every branch. We started last month, and we're having a couple more classes in November. We have several in October. Please check out the online calendar. I will link below. You can always go to eagentweb.com and click on the tile that says calendar. Please sign up for one of these classes. Show Me the Money and Get Me to Closing. These classes are taught, half of it is taught by our affiliated lender, and the other half is taught by our affiliated closing attorney. You will get it from the people involved what is going on. You will also get at these classes copy of the new closing disclosure, and you need to be familiar with it so that you can answer questions on behalf of your client that they ask you regarding all of the information that's on there. Another recommendation is that you become familiar with the closing disclosure and learn all about it so that you can answer questions and so you can correct any potential mistakes that are on there. The third strong suggestion is that you should always, but definitely for the first 90 days when this is going to affect, strongly suggest that you use affiliated lenders and affiliated closing attorneys. Use the people you know, love, and trust that you have great ongoing communication with. You have got to exert some influence and some control on your buyers. If you have a buyer and they come to you and they want to use a lender with whom you have not worked in the past, you are going to have an issue with your communication with them. And again, the majority of lenders are the ones preparing these closing disclosures. You've got to be able to have that ongoing communication. You've got to be able to use an affiliate that you can pick up the phone and call, and they will take your call. You can send them a text and they will text you back. They know who you are and they will work to communicate with you to come to a successful closing. One other issue is that there are going to be potentially two closing disclosures, one for the buyer and one for the seller. And the buyer is not necessarily going to see the seller's disclosure. There's still a little bit of confusion as to at what point that process is occurring. Is that going to be the final one or just a preliminary one? But again, encourage you, please go to these classes. Please contact our affiliated closing attorneys and our affiliated lenders. The list and the contact information is down at the bottom of every Sunday's email, as well as when you go to our blog, maximizeyourrealestatecareer.com, and you click on vendors, it is all there. I want to thank so much all of our affiliated lenders and closing attorneys for sharing all the information that they are learning in their training classes and their own research with me so that I can share it with you guys, our agents. Again, thank you so much. And I'm Dana Sparks, broker with Maximum One Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education.